3 claps this time.
It's my marker.
1 hop
It
this
works.
time.
Ready?
Okay. Yep. Welcome to Fireside Breakdowns. I'm Robin.
And I'm John.
On this show, we break down some of the most controversial, complex, and even polarizing topics facing our society. We use honest, good faith analysis, we use
Vast
honest,
by research.
fast by research. Okay. I can't even do it.
I can't.
I'm going to start the whole paragraph over.
All the way back.
Uh-huh. On this show, we break down some of the most controversial, complex, and even polarizing topics facing our society. We use honest, good faith analysis, backed by research, to form our conclusions. We promise to skew our bias toward what can be factually supported and to make it clear when we're giving you our opinion versus speaking about actual research.
We're human. We have blind spots and personal biases, and they will show up sometimes. But the goal of this show isn't to convince you to see things our way. We want to give everyone a foundational understanding of these complicated topics and present the most truthful information available so that we can discuss and address these issues in a thoughtful, beneficial way.
We talk about some pretty heavy stuff on this show, and we tackle topics that might feel polarizing. But we do that because we have an important goal in mind. We want to change the way that people have hard conversations. And we think that we can do that using research and discussion to create common understanding. And since you're here, we hope you want the same thing.
So we suggest getting comfortable and maybe having a good drink on hand as we work through this stuff. Welcome to our fireside.
Yes. Absolute banger of a dance jam this week.
Black Velvet. I've never heard this one. I'm going to have to look it up.
On my top 20 songs of all time.
It uses a Victrola in the lyrics, which is such a limited audience for that reference that I have to watch. I have to find out.
The whole song is about Elvis Presley.
You know what this episode's about? Not Elvis Presley.
Not Elvis Presley.
So, for a month. Hold on, wait. This is perfect for this. For a month, every 4 years, about half the global population puts their entire social calendar on hold to watch 32 teams compete for the FIFA World Cup. It contends only with the Olympics for the title of largest sporting event in the world. But this year's event, held in Qatar, which is actually not the right way to pronounce it. It's more like Qatar. But we're not going to pronounce it that way at all in this episode. This year's event is held in Qatar and has been marked by controversy. From corruption in the bidding process to human rights violations against migrant workers, the event is wrought with issues, drawing attention from non-sporting organizations worldwide. And it's causing an ethical dilemma for many of the world's soccer teams and fans.
If you're not a soccer fan or you don't follow the out-of-game happenings in the various football associations, you might have been caught off guard by all the coverage. I know I was. I had no idea there was a bidding process for hosting the World Cup or that so much infrastructure had to be developed to support the influx of fans. Knowing now that it rivals the Olympics in viewership and attendance and facilities, yeah, that makes sense. But you also may not understand why so many people are struggling with whether or not to support the event in light of all the allegations that have surfaced. I know I had a flippant answer to that question at first. It seems very reasonable that fans and organizations would try to send a message to FIFA by not supporting the event. But the reality of social responsibility is much more complicated than it seems on the surface.
Our goal with this show is always to give you the information and the tools you need to have good conversations about nuanced topics like this. So in this episode, we're taking a closer look at the allegations against FIFA and Qatar and asking what kind of social responsibility the organization, the teams, and the fans have when ethical situations like this arise. We're trying to set you up for success when you talk to the soccer fans in your life. We are not able to cover the entire story for this one, though.
No.
Just like, listen. There are people who have made careers on this particular event.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
there are entire podcasts dedicated to covering this. World Corrupt on from the Crooked Media guys on the Pod Save the World feed is a good one that's only a few episodes long. I think it's like 5 episodes long. That'll give you a pretty good primer on everything. We're not going to get that deep in this episode. Just
No.
disclaimer up top.
We're definitely
Um,
gonna spend more time talking about, like, the practicalities of applying a social responsibility mindset in a situation like this. There's
yeah,
tons of information about the rest.
absolutely. And all right, fasten your seatbelts because in this week's patron only bonus content, we're talking about the big deal with beer.
Yes. Me and beer's a pretty big deal.
It is
But but
big beer.
big beer, big deal, big time. But before we roll into the rest of this episode, if you are watching on YouTube, hi, hello. We would love it if you let us know you're here. Drop us a comment with your thoughts on this World Cup controversy, or just tell us which team you're supporting. And if you want to help us change the way that people have hard conversations, click the subscribe
Smash
button.
that subscribe button.
How long have you been waiting to do that? For so long.
The first time you wrote anything about the subscribe button into the show. Okay. I'm pouncing on it.
Oh my God. Well, and then I'm going to say, and click the little bell icon right next to it so that you don't miss a notification. We do post a new episode mostly every week, and we cover topics that are timely and relevant to the conversations that you will probably find yourself having at the holiday dinner table this year. And we promise to maybe only do the Smash
One
thing,
time.
like
Just, this is the only time. It's the most annoying.
shamash that
I just
like
just
button.
just just one. I needed one smash in my life. That's all. Okay.
Respectfully click the subscribe button.
Please respectfully click the subscribe button after receiving the appropriate consent. Thank you very much. Okay.
And maybe leave it a tip for its excellent service.
Okay. Well, now we're into it. Anyway, let's start this discussion off by talking about the two primary allegations being made against FIFA and Qatar concerning this year's event. Much like with the Olympics, the World Cup has some pretty high requirements for what a country needs in order to host. Also, like the Olympics, it can be very expensive to host with no guarantee of economic return. Countries that host the World Cup must meet minimum infrastructure requirements, including criteria for stadiums, hotels, transportation options, communications, and electrical grids. Basically, they have to be a well functioning society able to support a lot of people. These factors are so important that roughly 70% of the bidding process comes down to having this infrastructure ready to go or having plans and commitments in place to show that these criteria are going to be met.
These requirements are not anything to sneeze at either. FIFA requires a host country or countries to have 12 stadiums, each with a capacity of 40,000 to 80,000 seats, depending on which games are scheduled to be played there. Each team needs its own training site and a training site at the stadium. In 2026, FIFA will require 14 stadiums and 150 training grounds.
That's
Uh,
because they are expanding the field, metaphorically, not literally,
right.
to more teams playing.
Yes. And these stadiums happen to attract a lot of controversy as well. FIFA requires that the stadiums be spread across the country, which frequently means that they're not near any major cities or teams that will use them after the World Cup, which basically guarantees that they're going to fall into disrepair at some point. This happens with the Olympics a lot too. But then this is despite the fact that they're located near city centers, and then they take up a lot of valuable limited real estate in those city centers, never to be used again. It's a whole situation. The cost of constructing or building the stadiums is absolutely massive. South Africa spent $1.3 billion on building and refurbishing stadiums for the 2010 World Cup. Brazil spent $3.5 billion dollars for 2014, and then Russia spent 3.8 billion for 2018.
Yeah. Just for the
Again,
stadiums.
these billions,
Billions.
billions.
On top of that, each stadium must have a nearby airport with the requisite infrastructure to shuttle surges in passengers to regional destinations like the stadium itself, but also the hotels. And since, again, this is an incredibly temporary surge in demand, it's very difficult to build something that won't later be unnecessary and therefore turn this whole thing into a waste of money. Again, in 2010, South Africa invested another $2.6 billion upgrading just their transportation infrastructure. 1.3 billion on stadiums, another 2.6 billion on transit infrastructure. Ugh. Additionally, FIFA requires 72 base camp hotels for the teams and referees, plus an additional 4 hotels per stadium location. Then they require another 1,760 to 8,080 hotel rooms per host city for the spectators. The variance in numbers is again, it's based on which game is going to be played in the city. So for the bigger games, you need more people because it's going to be a bigger crowd. Brazil couldn't meet this demand, so they brought in 6 cruise ships to provide 10,000 more rooms, but that wasn't cheap either. That alone, just bringing in the cruise ships, required $7 billion in harbor upgrades. So that's $10.5 billion from Brazil just between stadiums and harbor upgrades.
Jeez Louise.
Yeah. The 2018 World Cup in Russia took place at 12 venues in 11 cities, requiring Russia to build 108 new facilities, including 96 training sites for the World Cup, 27 new hotels, 26 transport facilities, and updates for 13 hospitals.
Holy balls.
Yeah.
So understandably, building these stadiums and the infrastructure for an event that's only going to happen for a few months out of one year and then likely won't come back for several decades at a minimum is not exactly what most people would call fiscally responsible. So, given these requirements, the natural question is, did Qatar meet these requirements? Well, they didn't have the existing infrastructure for sure. For example, at the cost of $45 billion, Qatar planned to build an entire city from scratch that would include 22 brand new hotels, turning a vacant desert into a luxury 450,000 person, 38 square mile metropolis. They also plan to build an offshore luxury resort, all to meet FIFA's requirements.
In fact, during the bidding process itself, FIFA flagged several concerns about Qatar hosting, including the lack of the aforementioned rather extensive infrastructure requirements, as well as the fact that Qatar is, well, to quote Wikipedia, mostly flat and barren desert covered with loose sand and gravel. That is a direct quote.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
as one would expect from a desert, it's hot there, like really hot. The World Cup is typically held in the summer, through June and July. The average temperature in Qatar from 1962 to 2013 was 95 and 97 degrees, respectively, for those months, with the average high temperature hanging out around a balmy 107 degrees. You do not want to know what the record highs for
You do.
you do
Mhm.
want to know.
Always do.
Okay. Well, coming straight from the pits of hell, try 120 and 122 degrees. Like,
That's awful.
oof,
It's a dry heat.
it's not the heat that'll get you, it's the humidity.
Yeah, so, clearly, in layman's terms, it's just too dang hot to play soccer in weather like that. The concerns about the temperature were actually enough that Qatar's bid was listed as high risk, and yet it still won the decision. Qatar had 14 votes to the United States' 8 at the end of that decision process. Uh, so how did that even happen?
Well, quite simply, money. way
Oh,
back in 2020. Yeah, 2020, so far back. The Department of
so far.
Justice issued an indictment which included accusations of both Russia and Qatar bribing FIFA officials to secure rights to host the World Cup.
Hmm.
The indictments actually charged some media executives and sports marketing company with several crimes in connection with bribes to secure television and marketing rights for international soccer tournaments, which is the World Cup. Uh,
Mhm, mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, these indictments were part of a case spanning several years that had already led to convictions of several soccer officials and executives and led to depositions from former FIFA leadership. The scheme was pretty straightforward. Officials in charge of casting the votes for the hosting country were paid to cast their vote for specific countries. The complicated parts were how they got their money, and a lot of that involved fraud, you know, as it does.
as it does.
Three, as it does. Three South American officials were paid to vote for Qatar. A soccer official from Trinidad and Tobago was paid $5 million through several shell companies to vote for Russia. A Guatemalan official who pleaded guilty in 2016 to money laundering and fraud charges was also promised $1 million to vote for Russia.
And this really is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the corruption around FIFA. So called FIFA Gate. I'm just side note, I am so sick and tired of everything being gate. Like, we got to find something else to identify things as a scandal. Okay. I'm just,
Hmm.
everything's a gate these days. It means nothing's a gate. Anyway, FIFA Gate has led to the Department of Justice accusing at least 45 people and several sports companies of 92 crimes and accepting more than $200 million in bribes. At least 26 of those people have pleaded guilty.
That's so much money.
So much money.
Listen, I'll vote for Russia for $200
Yeah, listen, I need
million.
somebody somebody hit me up. I can be paid to vote.
Listen, my vote doesn't matter. Nobody's asking me where we should hold the World Cup, but if they wanted to. Uh, so another big scandal that we needed, or that, nope, I'm just gonna start reading. Here we go. As we said earlier, Qatar did not have the infrastructure to support the World Cup, but rather they promised that they would have everything that FIFA required before the World Cup started. Some estimates have Qatar spending over $200 billion to prepare for the World Cup, though Qatari officials say it's more like 6.5 billion. Either way, a vast sum of money has gone into construction and into everything that is needed to support the World Cup. And massive building projects require massive workforces. In Qatar, that meant a huge influx of migrant workers, about 30,000 of them just to build the stadiums, most from countries like Bangladesh and India and Nepal and the Philippines.
Sorry, important message. Yeah. Attention to the plight of migrant workers in Qatar picked up significantly in February 2021 when news outlets like The Guardian began reporting that 6,500 migrant workers had died in Qatar since the country won the World Cup bid. Now, that figure is based on numbers provided by the embassies representing the workers' countries in Qatar. But it's challenged by the government officials who say that it's misleading because not all deaths recorded were of people working on World Cup related projects and could represent those who had worked in Qatar for several years and may have died of old age or other natural causes. Put air quotes around natural. It's not in the script, but I did it anyway because I'm like, this is sus to begin
You're
with.
already not buying it.
I'm already not buying it. The government has acknowledged that 37 deaths occurred among World Cup laborers, but asserts that only 3 of them were work related.
I mean, it sounds sus. It really
It
does.
sounds that what you have major infrastructure and building projects around your country, and only 3 deaths have occurred.
Right,
Hmm.
right.
It's like, I mean, I don't expect it to be 6,500, but I also don't expect it to just be 3.
Right. Yeah, this mhm. I mean, and we should just point out that, like, there doesn't have to be some intentional cover up for this
Yeah,
to be suspicious. Just the idea that, like, nobody really knows, that in and of itself is bad,
yeah.
right? You don't have to be intentionally misleading people to be negligent in a situation like this. In 2016, Amnesty International accused Qatari companies of using forced labor. Their report said that workers are forced to live in squalid accommodations. They were forced to pay huge recruitment fees and had their wages withheld and their passports confiscated so that they could not leave. They also accused FIFA of failing almost completely to stop the human rights abuses. In response, the government of Qatar said that the welfare of the workers was a top priority and insisted that it was committed to a systematic reform of its labor laws. They introduced measures to protect foreign laborers from working in very hot weather, to limit their working hours, and to improve the conditions of workers' camps. By 2017, FIFA also seemed satisfied that the measures taken had FIFA also seemed satisfied that measures had been taken to protect workers, including a wage protection plan to ensure that employers pay their staff on time.
However,
Mhm.
in a 2021 report, campaign group Human Rights Watch said foreign workers were still suffering from, quote, punitive and illegal wage deductions and faced, quote, months of unpaid wages for long hours of grueling work. Stories abound of workers who are sleeping 11 to a room. And they're suffering from bed bug bites. They're scrounging to find work that will pay enough for them to maintain their visas, pay their recruiters, and still send money home. A lot of these laborers actually don't make enough at the construction job that they're working to survive.
Yeah.
So they're having to find second jobs to survive because the reason they came was to be able to provide for their families back home, a lot of them. And if you're spending every cent that you make just to get by where you are, that it's a whole waste of, just a waste for you.
Right. Yeah.
um, However, in Qatar it is illegal for a lot of these people to have a secondary job.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's complicated. It's super duper complicated and very messy. Um, there are some absolutely heart wrenching stories out there that you can find. They again, they abound. They're plentiful, especially right now. We didn't include a lot of them just because um, we wanted to talk brass tacks of a situation like this, but I would encourage you if you're interested in the topic. New York Times did some good ones. I believe The Atlantic had a good one that they just put out not too long ago. So, some really important stories, I think, to read. Um, yeah, again, those are some pretty heavy allegations, and there's no question that the toll on the real individual people in those situations has been very, very great. So, how much responsibility does FIFA as an organization carry when it comes to setting ethical standards? And how much responsibility do the teams and the fans have to hold the organization accountable for holding those standards? To answer that question, we have to look at a concept called social responsibility. Social responsibility is an ethical theory which holds that individuals are accountable for fulfilling their civic duty and that the actions of an individual must benefit the whole of society. In many applications of the theory, there's also a strong benefit or emphasis on the balance between economic growth and the welfare of society and the environment. That concept has been expanded more recently to organizations and companies to make the case that companies must act in a way that benefits society, not just the bottom line. The concept of social responsibility has become increasingly important to investors, employees, and consumers, especially millennials and Gen Z, who seek out organizations that contribute to the welfare of society and the environment. 41% of millennial investors put a significant amount of effort into understanding a company's social responsibility practices, CSR practices, before they invest in a company. And Gen Z will likely exceed that once they reach peak investing power.
This isn't even my final form.
Once they
um
go Super Saiyan.
Yeah, that's something personally that I know I am representative of as a millennial. Uh, when I was talking to my financial advisor, which makes it sound like I have way more money than I do. Um, but one of the first things I asked him was, can I avoid investing in certain companies that I didn't like their impact on the environment, or I didn't like the way that they handled certain social, societal, ethical, moral issues. Um, and luckily, he was like, "Oh yeah, absolutely, we can do that," which is cool. Good fiduciary.
Yeah.
Um, Here's a Fireside Breakdowns pro tip: go find yourself a fiduciary if you don't have one. Have many conversations, be brutally honest with them, and get your stuff in order. You're welcome. Okay, back to the World Cup. Um, so yeah,
I
that
tell you
I
all about fiduciary responsibility. I worked for a retirement plan management company.
but yeah, as a millennial, I am caught up in that 41%. Uh, so whether or not a company appears to be on the right side of a social issue is a bigger deal now than it has ever been before, clearly. According to a report compiled by Harvard Business School, 70% of Americans polled believe that it is important for companies to work to make the world a better place, while just 37% believe that it's most important for a company to make money for shareholders. I hope the companies are listening. Around three-quarters of respondents say that they are motivated to make a purchase from or invest in companies that are committed to making the world a better place. I am again wrapped up in this. I always look for companies, or I try to look for, who does a company donate campaign money to? Whose campaigns are they donating to?
Hmm.
Are they ethically sourcing their materials? A lot of companies now will plant a tree for every dollar you spend there, or some of them will plant two trees
Hmm.
for every dollar that you spend there. Um, some will, like, Article is a furniture company that I'm looking at buying stuff from because of the way that they handle sourcing their materials, and they present themselves as an ethical company. And that was one of the primary motivators for me seeking out their stuff first. They do not sponsor the show, but they could if they wanted.
I mean, I would not be mad about it.
Uh, 90% of employees who believe that their companies have a strong sense of purpose say that they are more inspired, motivated, loyal, and willing to recommend their employer to others in their social network, excuse me. And maybe most importantly to this conversation, a quarter of consumers and investors say that they have a zero tolerance policy toward companies that embrace questionable ethics practices.
Hmm.
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 Hmm. Does bribery
I
and
mean,
money
I
laundering
mean,
count?
I don't know. I don't know. Ninja
Found that
sneeze,
mute button right in time.
sneak attack. When you put these kinds of numbers together, it paints a picture of a consumer base that's very interested in where companies stand ethically. But now these statistics only reflect American respondents. And we do know that soccer is a global sport, right? Something like 86 million Americans are projected to watch at least some of the World Cup this year, but that's only about 2% of the viewing population. So clearly, American ethical standards aren't really going to make it or break it for FIFA.
Sorry, critical conversation. But this sentiment is growing globally, and many more international organizations are going to have to account for this mindset as they move forward. A 2020 study that included 8,000 respondents from 8 countries, which is a pretty representative sample, it's a
Yeah.
good size, revealed that 94% of respondents believed that it is important for the companies they engage with to have a strong purpose. It also showed that when consumers believe a brand has a strong purpose, they are 4 times more likely to purchase from the company and 6 times more likely to protect the company in the event of a misstep or public criticism.
Which, like, that's a big fucking deal. Um, there was a company that I used to work for that we called this particular group of audience members of customers, we called them the wolf pack, because if someone were to criticize the company on social media at all, they would get absolutely devoured in the comments. Um, that's a really important part of a company's PR strategy. So if you're out there, FIFA, you maybe want to just take that into consideration. But clearly, the pressure here was not enough to make action essential. FIFA's president essentially told the world to get over it and focus on the football in a letter to the teams that was published then widely. So, if organizations like FIFA aren't going to take a stand on social issues, what is an ethical consumer or even a player to do? Is boycotting the right answer? I think that we all kind of have this idealistic perception that if we just put our collective foot down, vote with our dollar or our click, and demand change, that an organization will have no choice but to comply. That is a pretty fundamentally American mindset. Boycotts have been a driver of social change here for generations, right? It was actually one of the drivers of the Revolutionary War. It is quintessentially American to think this. But in reality, it is not that simple. In cases where the issue is ideological or even philanthropic, take Chick fil A's corporate donation situation from several years ago as an example, there may be no unintended effects from changing corporate behavior. But in cases where workers or children or national economies are involved, things get very complicated very, very quickly.
Speaking of Chick-fil-A, just I just want to put it out there for the record that I have never purchased that delicious, delicious fried chicken for myself because of
Mm.
their donation policies. And I've had it I've had it as part of like a work function and it's really
Uh-huh.
good.
It's really good.
It's really
I feel like
good.
they changed their donation policy, though.
I don't know that they
Imma have to look
did.
that up.
We're gonna have to look it up, but I just want everybody to know I suffer from my stances.
Uh,
The worst part is the worst the worst part is I used to work with a woman, lovely woman, um, who's a lesbian, and she she would come in, like, every day with a giant bag of Chick-fil-A, and she'd
oh
just
my
be like,
gosh, yeah.
"I don't even care, it's so good." She's like, "Why are you boycotting it?" I'm like, personal
Ugh.
war. This is my struggle."
There's
Uh,
actually a lot to be unpacked by about how we ethical consumerism. There's a lot to be unpacked in
yeah.
that conversation.
I I gave up shopping at Walmart years and years and years ago because of their treatment of employees.
I tried to give up shopping at Walmart, but that meant having to shop on Amazon, and I
Yeah, I know,
really
right?
don't know which is worse
Yeah.
because of
Congratulations.
where I live. In the Mid-South, you basically can shop at Walmart, or you can shop at 16 different stores to try to get everything you could have gotten at Walmart, thus polluting the environment and spending much more gas, or you can give all your money to Jeff Bezos.
Yep. Yep. You mean you don't wanna drive all the way across town to go to the Hy-Vee or something, but even then you couldn't get the stuff you can get at Walmart.
It's
Yep.
yeah.
Anyway, back to the World Cup.
Mhm, mhm.
I gave myself this name without looking it up, but I'm listen, disclaimer, I am trying not to make myself sound terrible here, but I'm gonna fail. Jur Ilm. Yeah?
Yeah,
Yeah?
yeah.
Alright. Okay. Jur Ilm, a forced labor coordinator for the Worker Rights Consortium, said that the sudden withdrawal of a company or initiative can actually cause more harm than activists realize, especially in foreign initiated boycotts. Rob Harrison, director of the nonprofit Ethical Consumer, says that boycotts are not a favorite tool among those campaigning for workers' rights. Instead, he says, his organization aims to support worker led organizations and help highlight unfair working practices to put pressure on organizations to change their practices altogether. Unionization, something like that, or
Yeah,
unionization if you are a scientist. You can see this that is such a nerdy joke. I'm so sorry. They're spelled exactly the same.
they
Um,
are. One has much greater implications, I think, than the other.
in this particular context, yeah. You can see that this push to organize the workers for change in a company modeled in organizations like Amnesty International, which is campaigning for Qatar and FIFA to take action to compensate the migrant workers in Qatar for their mistreatment, hardship, and labor.
Okay, so if we're not just going to straight boycott, should we put pressure on the sponsors or on the teams? Um, well, before we can answer that question, we have to consider the greater economic picture of the World Cup. There are 7 global FIFA partners, like Adidas and Coca Cola and Visa. There are 6 more World Cup sponsors, including McDonald's and Budweiser and Crypto.com. Um, and none of the sponsors have even considered removing their support for the event, despite the controversy. There's a really good reason for that. Adidas expects to earn about 400 million euros extra this year because of this event. It would take a very significant amount of pressure to outweigh that revenue.
To make something complicated a lot more complicated, we also have to acknowledge the virtual impossibility of 100% ethical consumerism. We were just highlighting that a few seconds ago with Robin's own struggles in
Yes.
Springfield. Um, each of those major sponsors plays a huge role in our everyday lives, from the products we know we buy from them directly to the other organizations and channels and companies and individuals they support to the other companies that own significant stakes in them. Disentangling the specific actions would uh, disentangling the specific actions one would need to take in order to effectively boycott any of these companies is overwhelming at best. It's like saying that you only want to buy American made products. There's no such thing.
Yeah.
Even if it says made in the USA, chances are all of its constituent parts were made in China.
Yeah. It's real messy, guys. It's real messy. I know people out there like to boycott their Starbucks, but it's real messy. And then there's the team, then nope, and then there's the money that each team earns. Okay, so teams get paid a baseline of $10,000 per player per day for participation, including an allotted preparation period. In 2018, each team that got eliminated at the group stage, that is the first stage, so the people who played the least, earned a minimum of $8 million in US dollars. Prize money for the winning team was $38 million. And national teams have control over what happens to that money and how much players earn. Oh, and then also FIFA pays about $2,800 per day to each individual club that releases a player to the national team to compete in the World Cup. So, like, there's a lot of money moving around, a lot. And that really limits incentives for players and for teams to speak out, especially when the organization threatens to penalize them for taking a stand, like it did for the teams who wanted to wear a One Love armband to demonstrate their support for LGBTQ rights in a country that does not recognize them at all and in which homosexuality is actually criminal. There were a lot of teams and players that wanted to kind of do their visible protest without
Mm,
necessarily causing disruption to the game, and they were told that they would be penalized if they did that. So,
yeah.
there's
I
a
would
lot on
just,
the line.
a lot on the line. I would, however, like to point out to the people. in our audience who may be possessed of the opinion that life does not hand out participation trophies, that the losing teams got an $8 million participation trophy for the World
Yeah.
Cup. The
Life
player,
might not hand them up, but
each
FIFA does.
each individual player. So I'm just saying, participation trophies are a real thing apparently.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
so what can we do? What can we actually do? This is super scientific. We have done many studies on this. Luckily, we have a broad swath of fireside breakdowns, political, social, economic,
Mhm.
and ethical advisors on tap to
Just
help us answer these questions. That's new since the last episode. Everybody, we won the lottery.
yeah, that's why
So
this episode came out a day late is because we just had to compile
or
all of
2.
our
Or 2.
advisors.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's your answer. Ready? Do what feels right to you. If you don't feel comfortable watching this year's cup, don't. And feel free to respectfully and without being sanctimonious explain why. Look for the organizations that are helping the cause and support them financially and publicly. Keep an eye out for ethical issues in advance of the next cup and work to raise awareness of them proactively.
The reality of situations like this is that there are so many ways to take action and affect change for the better, but there are also so few ways to force organizations like FIFA or countries like Qatar to feel the impact of what they've done. It would take a highly organized, global, cooperative, and sustained effort to try to impact their pocketbooks. And we're not saying that's impossible. People have gotten fed up before, but it is more possible for each of us to affect change on a much more individual level by supporting workers' rights organizations, by supporting aid organizations, and by opening up dialogue with local and national soccer associations to, you know, try to influence them before the money starts flowing.
Yeah. I don't personally believe that change comes from the bottom up or the top down, like solely.
Mhm.
It's always going to require effort from both sides. It's going to require the people who are affected most by it to cry out for change and have allies that will help them, and also for the people in charge to understand those calls for change and to act on them. So most of the people listening to this, I would hazard to say all of the people listening to this are part of the bottom up crowd. So that's what you do. And that's what we do with this podcast. We're at the bottom with everybody else,
Yep,
trying to affect social change in a sustainable and responsible and inclusive way.
exactly. I'm not quite sure what our record time is, but
We're somewhere around 40-ish minutes right now.
yeah, okay. So just a couple minutes for personal discussion, right?
Yeah.
Do you feel like, as a soccer fan, do you feel like FIFA has some responsibility here?
Mm, I mean, yes, FIFA does have a responsibility here. They need to be aware of the countries where they choose to have the World Cup occur. They need to be aware of how those countries treat the, shall we say, least among us. If we're going to use a biblical phrase, even if it's not exactly a flattering one for the people in that group,
Right.
um, and they need to make, I think, strong concerted efforts to use their global stage, their platform. They have a responsibility to use that to advocate for things like justice and equality and equity and concepts that I think are broadly and universally desirable.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, I agree. I It gets really, really complicated. Um, Obviously, the time to take action was in 2010, and the decision was to not give the bid to Qatar. But we know that that was a corrupt process in the first place. Um, so yeah, there's responsibility, but that action has to be taken during that first initial discovery phase.
Yeah.
Once you start getting into this process where countries are investing tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars possibly to be able to host this event, those dollars aren't going into a vacuum. They're paying local businesses or paying local or migrant workers. They're building economies, they're changing economies. And so once you start to push and pull on those factors, you start to involve a lot more people and you potentially make life harder for the people at the bottom, the people
Yeah.
doing the work, without any actual impact on the organization at the top. So,
I think the ethics after the decision was made are much harder than the ethics before the decision is made. Because after the decision is made, yeah, you've got people who are dependent for their livelihoods on this event. There are people right now in Qatar who are making money, hopefully making money off of this event. It's the most that they are going to make in their lifetime.
mhm,
And it is going to provide stability for their families for who knows how long, but
yeah,
but it's going to provide a better outcome for their families than would otherwise have been possible. So in that way, it is a blessing to many, many people. That is an educated guess, by the way. I don't have data to support
yeah,
that. But there are many, many people that are suffering, that are at least at least 3 people that died because of this, probably realistically many, many more than that. And many who are living, but in a worse position than they were before the World Cup came. So, yeah, the best time to make an ethical decision would have been way back in 2010. And
yeah,
moving forward, every time they host the decision making process. They did end up changing some of their rules for deciding who could host in 2012 after this process, and in part because of the controversy around Qatar winning. So,
yeah. So that's good, and that's the kind of responsibility that you want to see an organization take. Um, hey, we messed up. Let's change things so that we don't keep messing up more in the future. So
hopefully,
hopefully, yeah, hopefully it
we'll
continues that way.
see.
Fingers crossed. I guess I didn't realize how far out these decisions were made. I
Well,
mean, I know it with the Olympics, but not being all that well versed in the soccer community, I had no clue.
well, that's it makes sense to me, but only because I had an insider view on infrastructure and how long the projects take from beginning to end. And like in the US, 10 years from the planning stage to the final build is average for, say, like highways and stuff like that. So if you're going to build out an entire, city,
Yeah.
you need 10, 12, 14 years to get it done.
Yeah. No, that's an excellent point. Yeah. And again,
So,
like we talked to oh, go for it.
oh, I was just gonna move on to um, if FIFA has some responsibility, do you then feel like the teams have responsibility here?
Ye I mean, teams, yes and no. Again, they're kind of caught in that middle layer. If you think about how many of the teams that are competing at the World Cup come from countries that, um, are not considered the most economically stable or well-to-do countries in the world, it feels like a lot to ask players to risk potentially their family's economic stability, for a cause like this. And again, we have to acknowledge that the American or the Western worldview on some of these issues is not the same worldview that a lot of the globe has. Not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying it's different. And we have
Mm,
to acknowledge that. And so, when we hold other people to our ethical standards and our expectations, things get pretty messy. So, I mean, I think in the case of egregious, human rights violations and things like that, if you want to hold your own national team accountable, you should hold your own national team accountable in whatever way feels appropriate to you. Save violence, of course.
Yeah.
Um, But judging teams from other countries that you are not intimately acquainted with their values, thought processes, or, um, well-being is probably not the way to go on this one for me.
Yeah, and I agree. The teams, their responsibility is one. A lot of them, they're not decision makers to begin with. They're players,
Yeah.
um, and the coaches sometimes aren't really decision makers. They're at the mercy of the owners of the team, and so, you know, the teams. I think they have some responsibility to, if they can, make their thoughts known if they can do so safely and in a way that doesn't endanger themselves. Not every team, not every player for every team has that luxury. Some of
Mhm.
them, even if they are dissatisfied, they're on a national team for a nation that would punish them for speaking out. So
Mhm.
we have to acknowledge that not everything is as not everybody enjoys the freedoms that we do either in America, and freedom of speech being foremost among them. And so, yeah, I think there is responsibility, but it's very limited, for what can be reasonable and expected of them.
Yeah. Yeah, the balance of ethical consumerism and social responsibility and personal ethics is one that is really, really hard to get right. Especially because when we are passionate about something, especially something that we think is right or wrong, we want everyone else to be passionate with us. It's
Yeah.
human nature. It is built into our psychology. Um, but I think it comes down to what we were talking about earlier and just taking as much individual responsibility for your participation as you can. If you are uncomfortable with what's happening and you choose to continue to financially support the organization, then that's a dissonance that you have to wrestle with. And it's not anybody else's job to do that for you, but it's also not your job to do that for anyone else.
If you'd like to financially support an organization, why not Fireside Breakdowns? You can do so at firesidebreakdowns.com. That's right, our website. It has all sorts of great resources for you there. You can find our show notes, you can find our shows, you can find links to our socials, you can find links to our Patreon where you can legitimately financially support us. We will use your money to buy a cup of coffee.
Mhm.
Almost guaranteed. If it's not a cup of coffee, maybe a bottle of whiskey. Um,
Mhm.
and there's some cool perks that come with being a patron that we
Yeah,
fulfill at least 90% of the time.
it's true.
So there's only two of us, guys. There's only two. We're trying. Um, but yeah, that is it. That's the bump. That's it. Go to firesidebreakdowns.com. Oh, also leave us a review. Do it.
Mhm.
I'm not going to beg you anymore. Just telling you, do it.
Just do it.
Do it. If you're listening in Spotify, just click the little thing that lets you leave 5 stars. Done.
Yeah.
Perfect. Love it. Helps us so much. Helps other people find us. Boom.
Boom.
Okay, that's the bump.
That's the whole bump.
Good
Nothing but the
news.
bump. Oh, shit, I didn't find any good news.
That's right. I got some good news.
Okay.
Okay. I forgot what it was. It's gone. It's gone. The good news. I had it. I was like, this will make great good news. It's gone. You know what?
You
I remembered it. The good news is back. So the hold on a second. Let me pull up. Um,
I'm not gonna discuss how much it sounds like you were on cocaine in the last minute of this conversation. From the sniffs to the
it's
bumps to the
literally I've been
forgetting.
fighting off the sneeze for like probably 45 minutes now. Like it's just hovering there. It's just hovering, and I can't. Um, So I think I think this is good news. This is
Mhm.
highly subjective, but it is definitely good news. U.S. soccer, we scrubbed an emblem from the Iranian flag for the World Cup, a very important emblem
Mhm,
um,
mhm.
that is the emblem of the Islamic Republic. So the Iranian flag did not always include this symbol on it, that the red central symbol on the flag. And by removing that symbol, people are the U.S. Soccer Federation is saying it is being accused of, I suppose,
Mhm.
of supporting protesters in Iran ahead of the World Cup, the World Cup game between the United States and Iran that's happening uh, tomorrow as we record this. Hopefully today is the day that it comes out. So the government of Iran reacted, accused America of removing the name of God from its national flag.
Oh,
Um,
man.
but there's a lot of complicated history about the
It's
government of Iran going
such
into
a
this.
lot.
But yeah, not everybody, we'll put it this way, supports having that symbol on the flag. And many Iranians were very pleased to not see it on the flag.
Mhm.
Um, I happen to be familiar. Moving on. Um,
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
but the USSF, that would be the United States Soccer Federation, they said in a statement Sunday morning that they had decided to forego the official flag on social media to show support for the women in Iran fighting for basic human rights. So it's not just an accusation. USSF was like, yeah, that's exactly what we were doing. Go
Yeah,
be mad about, die mad about it.
get mad at it.
Yeah. So then, yeah, the U.S. men's team displayed a banner with the squads matches in the group stage, and they also used the Iranian flag without the symbol of the Islamic Republic on it. So again, yeah, kind of poking them in the eye. I love it. It's just look up the whole story because we don't have time to cover it all, but
No, but it's so
it
good.
is incredible, and it made me very happy to see it. And it made some people I know also very happy to see it. Um, and we are probably going to have to cover the ongoing protests uh, in
Yeah.
in Iran soon. Um, but yeah, okay. I think that's everything.
I think that's everything that we have to say about that today.
That's what I got to say about that. We're gonna go ahead and peace out for this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hopefully, you can catch or did catch the U.S. Iran game that happened 1 o'clock Eastern time on Tuesday, November
Mhm.
30th. I will be watching with bated breath from my desk, and for the most part, um, as much of it as I can watch, which will not be much, unfortunately. But I'm very much looking forward to the outcome, and we will talk to you hopefully in 1 week. Until that time, please take care of each other.